Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second Fishbowl of Theater History and Literature 1. We will be discussing Aristos Aristophanes' play Lysistrata, along with Lecture 3. So let's go ahead and get started. I'll lead us into the first question. What is the historical audience meant to learn from this show? Uh, I think the historical audiences are meant to learn that war is destructive and senseless, and the cost of war affects everyone, even those who seemingly don't have a place in it, namely the Greek women, and emphasizes the importance of peace and unity when it comes to creating a constructive and effective society. And on the topic of unity, I think historical audiences are also supposed to learn that traditional gender roles are old fashioned and biased, and society will benefit should those roles be subjected to change, to challenge and change. Maybe not necessarily equality, but maybe giving them more say in certain aspects of Greek society. I also think historical audiences are meant to learn, or I guess, criticize the failings and shortcomings of the Athenian government and its political customs, and also reprimand figures in power for their less than effective decisions, which kind of ties back to the idea that change is maybe necessary to make a better society, especially when it comes to tradition. Okay, Commodores.
Yeah, so I agree with most of what you said, and I had a lot of what you said also written down in my outline. Um, Correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure they were also going through a war at the time when this was written. And something that I had was seeing this, show that was kind of about this war would probably make, the men in the audience kind of, I think, uncomfortable is a word that I used with some of, the humor that was made during the show. Um, and and maybe even angry because maybe they might have looked at it as like sort of making fun or poking fun at it. And yeah, I mean that's something I said a lot of what you said, and I think that's also something that could have affected them, the audience that way is kind of the real life and the show kind of having the same thing going on.
Yeah, I had a lot of similar stuff. I also really thought about the fact that like this is a show made by men for men to view, performed like every actor was a man. And so I also kind of also took inspiration from the lecture a little bit about looking at um, like not getting not what is the way I'm trying to word this, not letting your ego and like your pride get in the way of possibly forming like a peace treaty. Because I also feel like a lot of the times in war there is this like want to be the winner of the war despite what the population might say. And I think that it was also kind of speaking to that of like, don't let your need to win start negatively affecting your society in such a huge way. So that's kind of like really what I focus on when it was talking about what people should learn from this.
Yep, good points. Let's go on to the next question. How is Greek religion exemplified in the show? Alex.
Hello, that's my question. Okay, so what I had was I think obviously sort of like Medea, Greek religion was a big part in this show. I think it was all throughout the show. Of course, I where it is set. Um, what did I say? Hold on, let me so I keep myself on track. Um, yeah, religion and everyday life in in um in Athens was like always together. I think they went hand in hand and sort of kind of the same way for religious now that it does today. Um, I think the women in this show sort of used the gods to kind of like make this, I guess, so, quote unquote, strike more, mean more, I guess, or show that, how serious it is. And then I think it may be taken more seriously by the people that they're trying to promote this message to. Um, I think in the play, the women make these oath kind of to the gods that they will stick to this sort of I guess sex strike. Um, and back then, oaths were taken very seriously because those were kind of like, I guess, promises to the gods, and they were punishable. So I think it kind of reverts back to what I was saying earlier. They're kind of using this outlet to kind of um, for them to be taken more seriously. Yes.
Yeah, I also talked about their oath and how at first they were talking about like maybe slaughtering a sheep, maybe using the entrails of a white horse, and then finally they decided on using wine. And I think that it really made sense for them to use wine because it represents Dionysus, and Dionysus was the god that they attributed to theater, and also to like fertility and stuff like that. So if there was any god that they were going to give an oath to, it made sense that it was Dionysus out of anything. And also, I other gods' names come up a lot throughout the entire show, like just in casual conversation. Well, not necessarily like casual, but um, in the argument between husband and wife, both of them would use the gods' names very frequently, and I think that really just like speaks to how integrated gods were into everyday life and everyday speech because there are some religions where it is like you don't call on a god or use a god's name in casual conversation unless it's about worship, but it was like a very normalized and everyday part of Greek life. So,
Bouncing off what Alex and Alyssa said, um, yeah, because in Greek society, religion was everything. It was incorporated into everything they did. There was a god for everything. Specifically, they prayed to the gods Artemis, Athena, and Aphrodite in the play. Um, and I think it's interesting how women's place in society is so they don't have a place in society yet. There are so many goddesses they all pray to constantly. I think that's an interesting dichotomy. And just like Alex said, they did use these oaths and praying to these gods and using religious vocabulary in their speeches and moral messages to give it more weight. I think that really sent their message out more.
Cool. Next question. How is Greek ideas of morality exemplified in the show? Alyssa?
yeah, so Greek morality is very different than today's because Greeks were very focused on becoming the perfect citizen. And I think that a lot of that also comes from like knowing your place in society, not reaching up for something that's out of your, out of your range. And I think that in this play, it was shown that women had stepped out of their place in society, um, and that was a negative. Like, yes, this is a comedy. Yes, it's like poking fun at all of these things, but it was a bad thing that they stepped out of line, even though they were speaking out against a war, even though they were like they had good points. It didn't. They didn't really want to hear the women because you were out of line. This was a man's role. This is men dictate wartime and peacetime. A woman shouldn't have a place here. And then by the end of the play, they ended up going back to their place. And I feel like knowing your position in society is like the moral thing to do in Greek culture at this point. Um, it didn't really matter to be like the best version of yourself, to be the most charitable, to help individuals. It was entirely about helping the city itself. So that's kind of where I went with it.
And not just the city itself, but the citizens, so the men.
Yeah. Um,
I'm also in this one. I guess I could continue. Alyssa, right? What I really liked what you said about it trying to form their idea of morality, and the shows are trying to form that perfect citizen, and it's all for a social system. Um, Something I love about the in Lysistrata is we can see the traditional Greek morals kind of inverted. Um, and they're inverted, as you mentioned earlier, they are going through a war. It's a critique of the Peloponnesian War, but they invert their morals to explore the gender dynamics. Um, it deals with morality concerning gender roles, yes, warfare, the importance of moderation, by having women act as the main voice of reason. And this is what I love because the men are supposed to be the main voice of reason. Having women act as the main voice of reason, Aristophanes exposes the failure of the men to adhere to their own society's moral standards, which is just, it's so funny to me to have women bringing forth these perfectly logical, like, solutions. Well, not logical, but, actually making these solutions happen where that should have been the man's job. It's fantastic.
Um, and yeah, I think it's very interesting how the morals were kind of flipped so that the women were the moral ones and the men were unself-controlled because they were losing it. Um, it's interesting how the play is written because the only time that the morality is criticized, it's through like comedic means, which I think is like the women having the power. They probably thought that was funny. It's through comedic means, and but then also they sugarcoat it at the end by complimenting their values of order and civic responsibility. And yeah, it's like, oh yeah, this is wrong, but also don't worry about it. Yeah.
Next question. How does the Greek conception of gender impact how we should read this show? Kate?
That's me. um, the Greek concept of gender takes an already impactful story and it gives it context that raises the stakes. It gives the reader a much deeper context as to the risks these women are taking. We learned last week that there are three classes in Greek society, and women had no place in that. They were like, the metaphor we were given was like a puppy that's at home. You're like, oh, make me dinner. Um, well, that gender dynamic is not the same today. There's some modern day takeaways in this story. I'm going to talk about that in a second. In a society where women had absolutely no voice, they managed to show the men. But the bottom line is that the women are the root of humanity. So they took their power. And I think that's really interesting. Even though this was written for men by men in a society that was for men, I think there's some definite like poetic justice. I think in today's day and age, people would have still something negative to say about women taking their power and using not having sex that is the harm. But I think it does repeat itself in modern day. Like birth rates are dropping, and I think that's really interesting that Greek society and modern society kind of mimic with gender role impact. Yeah.
Commenters? Devin or Lisa?
Yeah, I can go first.
Okay.
Something that really stood out to me was the whole story being comedic, with women who are of no status in Greek society teaching the men a lesson. I think that's what made it a comedy in the eyes of historical Greek societies. Um, and like the story pushing forward that women are really only good for pleasure, with them like holding back on giving the men that to kind of get what they want with ending the war between them.